April 16, 1945. Radar Picket Station 1, 50 miles north of Okinawa. Aboard the destroyer USS Laffey, Lieutenant Frank Manson watched the 5-inch mount crews move through their drills with a rhythm that bordered on mechanical: load, ram, fire, eject. The breech opened automatically, the spent powder casing clattering onto the deck. Already, another round was sliding into place. 12 seconds. That's how long it took from first spotting an incoming kamikaze to that kamikaze reaching the ship at 300 miles per hour. In 12 seconds, a well-trained crew could put 3 shells into the air. But on this particular morning, surrounded by the growing roar of Japanese engines, 12 seconds would feel like an eternity. The radar operator's voice crackled through the intercom. 50-plus contacts inbound, bearing 340, range 30 miles and closing. Manson's hand moved instinctively to the fire control telephone. Around him, 5-inch guns began, traversing northward, their barrels rising toward intercept altitude. The mathematics of this engagement were brutally simple. Each gun could fire 15 to 20 rounds per minute in sustained combat. Laffey mounted 6 5-inch guns. That meant potentially 120 shells per minute directed skyward. Against a determined pilot who had already written his farewell letter, who expected death as certainly as sunrise, those numbers would have to be enough. What none of the Japanese pilots diving toward Laffey that morning understood was that they were flying into a revolution in naval gunnery, a technological and tactical transformation that would turn their suicide attacks into a calculated slaughter. The weapon system that would shred their formations had been refined through years of combat, perfected in the crucible of Pacific warfare, and delivered through a gun the Japanese came to call simply the 5-inch machine gun. This is the story of how American engineering, systematic training, and advanced fire control created an anti-aircraft barrier so effective that even men willing to die couldn't penetrate it. This is the story of the Inch38. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The journey to April 1945 began more than a decade earlier, in naval design offices where American engineers faced a fundamental problem. In the 1920s and early 30s, the United States Navy employed 2 completely different types of medium-caliber guns. High-velocity 5-inch 51 guns armed battleships and some destroyers for anti-surface warfare. These weapons could fire flat, fast projectiles designed to penetrate the hulls of enemy destroyers at extended range. For anti-aircraft defense, ships mounted 5-inch 25 guns. These shorter-barreled weapons fired at lower velocity, but could elevate to high angles and used fixed ammunition, making them easier to load when the gun was pointed skyward. This division made sense in an era when aircraft were slow, fragile biplanes that posed minimal threat to warships. But by the mid-1930s, that world was disappearing. Dive bombers were emerging as legitimate threats. The development of torpedo bombers, capable of attacking from multiple angles, meant that ships needed guns that could engage both surface and air targets without switching weapons. Weight limitations imposed by international naval treaties made mounting both types of guns impractical on smaller warships. The solution emerged from the Bureau of Ordnance, a new 5-inch gun with a 38 caliber barrel, meaning the barrel length was 38 times the bore diameter, or 190 inches, slightly under 16 feet. The 38 caliber length represented a carefully calculated compromise, longer than the anti-aircraft, 5-inch 25, providing higher velocity and greater range, shorter than the anti-destroyer 5-inch 51, allowing faster traverse and elevation while maintaining the ability to fire at high angles. The critical innovation came in the mounting and loading system. The 5-inch 38 would use semi-fixed ammunition. Each round consisted of 2 separate components, a 55-pound projectile and a powder case containing the propellant. Unlike bag charge systems used on larger naval guns, where the projectile and powder had to be loaded separately, semi-fixed ammunition allowed both components to be loaded in a single operation. This dramatically increased the rate of fire. The gun featured a sliding breech block that opened automatically after firing, ejecting the spent powder case without human intervention. The breech mechanism could be operated at any angle of elevation, meaning the gun could be loaded whether pointing at the horizon or nearly vertical. Power. Ramming drove the projectile and powder case into the breech with hydraulic force, maintaining a consistent loading cycle regardless of the gun's angle. The first prototype was delivered in 1933. Testing revealed a weapon system with remarkable capabilities. Maximum range of 18,000 yards, over 10 miles, when firing at surface targets. Anti-aircraft ceiling of 37,200 feet, approximately 7 miles vertically. Rate of fire that exceeded initial specifications, capable of 15 to 20 rounds per minute in sustained combat, with short bursts reaching 22 rounds per minute under optimal conditions. The gun entered service aboard USS Farragut, commissioned in 1934. This Fletcher-class destroyer would be the first of hundreds of American warships to mount the Inch38 as their primary armament. The standardization that followed was unique in naval history. By 1941, virtually every major class of American warship under construction mounted Inch38 guns. Destroyers typically carried 5 guns in single mounts. Light cruisers of the Atlanta class mounted 16 in twin turrets, creating the most formidable anti-aircraft broadside in any navy. Battleships and aircraft carriers employed them as secondary batteries, defending against both aircraft and small surface threats. This standardization delivered enormous logistical advantages. Ammunition could be produced in massive quantities without variation. Spare parts worked across dozens of ship classes. Training could be centralized, with gun crews moving between different ships without relearning weapon systems. The supply chains supporting Pacific operations became dramatically simpler when every major combatant used the same 5-inch ammunition. But the gun itself, however capable, was only part of the system. What transformed the Inch38 from an excellent weapon into a subpredit? Revolutionary one was its integration with the Mark 37 Director and Mark I fire control computer. The Mark 37 Director resembled a small turret mounted high on a ship's superstructure, 2 long rangefinder ears extended from either side, giving the Director its distinctive appearance. Inside, a control officer and director operator tracked targets using optical sights and, in later models, fire control radar. The Director measured target bearing, elevation, and range with precision that manual gun aiming could never achieve. This information fed into the Mark I fire control computer, a 3,000-pound electromechanical analog computer installed deep in the ship's plotting room. The Mark I was a marvel of mechanical engineering. Hundreds of gears, cams, and servo motors processed target motion data and calculated firing solutions in real time. The computer accounted for target speed, altitude, and course. It compensated for gravity's effect on the shell's trajectory. It corrected for wind, for the Magnus effect of the spinning projectile, for parallax caused by the separation between the Director and the guns themselves. It even compensated for the ship's roll and pitch, ensuring that shells were fired when the guns passed through the correct angle regardless of sea conditions. The system calculated the future position where target and shell would meet. This required predicting not just where the aircraft was, but where it would be several seconds later when the shell reached intercept altitude. The Mark I performed this calculation continuously, updating the solution multiple times per second as the target maneuvered. Once the fire control solution was computed, the system transmitted pointing orders directly to the gun mounts. Electric drive slewed the guns to the calculated bearing and elevation automatically. The gun crew's responsibility shifted from aiming to loading and firing. When the pointer squeezed the trigger, all guns under director control fired simultaneously, their shells converging on a single point in space where the target was predicted to be. The theoretical performance was impressive. In practice, early combat experience revealed significant limitations. The Mark I's computing time created a lag between target detection and accurate firing solution. Against fast-moving aircraft executing evasive maneuvers, the system struggled to converge on a stable solution before the target exited effective range. The time constant, the period required for the computer to settle on an accurate solution, was 14 seconds at long range. Against an aircraft closing at 300 miles per hour, 14 seconds consumed nearly half the available engagement time. The Mark 37 system was designed around assumptions about aerial combat that the war quickly invalidated. The system expected targets to maintain relatively constant course and speed. It anticipated engagement ranges, measured in miles, with minutes to refine the firing solution. It presumed that damaged aircraft would break off attacks, giving gunners multiple opportunities to engage. Kamikaze tactics violated every one of these assumptions. The first large-scale kamikaze attacks occurred in October 1944 during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi's newly formed Tokubetsu Kogekitai, special attack units, launched coordinated suicide strikes against American escort carriers. The escort carrier USS St. Louis took a Zero fighter directly through her flight deck. The aircraft's bomb detonated in the hangar bay, setting off stored ammunition and torpedoes. Within 30 minutes, St. Louis rolled over and sank. 113 men died. Over the following weeks, kamikaze attacks struck with increasing frequency. The pattern became grimly consistent. Japanese aircraft approached in formation, often with conventional bombers and fighters providing escort and distraction. When American Combat Air Patrol engaged, some kamikazes broke through. Those that penetrated the fighter screen dove toward their targets with single-minded determination. Ships' anti-aircraft guns opened fire at maximum range. Destroyers, cruisers, and battleships filled the sky with 5-inch shells set to detonate at specific altitudes. 40mm Bofors guns engaged at intermediate range, their tracers arcing toward incoming aircraft. 20mm Oerlikons provided last-ditch defense in the final seconds. Many kamikazes were destroyed, but the ones that got through accomplished what entire bomber formations could not. The battleship USS Colorado, the cruisers USS Louisville and USS Denver, the carriers USS Intrepid and USS Hancock all suffered kamikaze damage during the Philippines campaign. 30 ships were sunk, at least 1,400 sailors were killed. The tactical problem was unlike anything the Navy had faced. Conventional bombers attacked to survive. They dropped weapons and evaded. Anti-aircraft fire that damaged an attacking bomber often caused it to break off, seeking to escape before sustaining fatal damage. Kamikaze pilots accepted damage, absorbed hits, and kept coming. An aircraft with its engine on fire, with control surfaces shot away, with its pilot dead or dying, could still glide those final 1,000 yards into an American ship. Post-action analysis of the Philippines campaign revealed disturbing statistics. 5-inch guns, despite their range and power, were accounting for relatively few kamikaze kills. The issue wasn't the weapon's capability. It was the ammunition and the tactics employed. American 5-inch guns were firing primarily common ammunition with mechanical time fuses. These fuses were set manually before loading, timed to explode at a specific altitude based on the fire control solution. The system worked adequately against conventional bombers, maintaining predictable flight paths. Against kamikazes executing high-speed diving attacks, mechanical time fuses proved far less effective. Setting the time fuse required several seconds of manual adjustment using fuse setting rings. By the time the shell was loaded and fired, the rapidly maneuvering kamikaze had often changed altitude or course. The shell would explode where the target was predicted to be, not where it actually was. Even when time fuses were set correctly, the effective burst radius was limited. A shell had to explode within 70 yards of the target to guarantee destruction. Beyond that range, shell fragments might damage an aircraft but wouldn't necessarily stop it. The solution arrived in the form of the VT fuse. Variable time, though the letters actually stood for nothing, chosen simply as a code name. In reality, the VT fuse was a proximity fuse, a miniature radar transmitter receiver installed in the nose of each shell. The technology was extraordinary. Each fuse contained approximately 130 miniaturized, electronic components including vacuum tubes barely larger than a man's fingertip. These components had to survive being fired from a 5-inch gun. The setback force, when the gun fired, generated 20,000 times the force of gravity, an instantaneous acceleration that would crush conventional electronics. The shell's rotation through the gun's rifling grooves spun it at 25,000 revolutions per minute. The fuse had to function flawlessly under these brutal conditions. When fired, the proximity fuse activated automatically. Its transmitter began broadcasting radio signals. When these signals reflected off a nearby aircraft, the frequency shift caused by the target's motion triggered the detonation circuit. The fuse exploded the shell when it came within lethal range of any aircraft, without requiring manual prediction of the target's future position. The advantages were immense. No more manual fuse setting. No more guessing where the target would be several seconds in the future. No more shells exploding harmlessly because the aircraft had jinked or dove. The proximity fuse transformed near misses into kills. It increased the effective burst radius from 70 yards to over 100 yards. Most importantly, it allowed 5-inch guns to engage kamikaze effectively at all ranges and in all attack profiles. Initial tests in August 1942 exceeded all expectations. The light cruiser USS Cleveland conducted live-fire evaluations against drone aircraft in Chesapeake Bay. Gunners brought down 3 drones with just 4 bursts of proximity-fused ammunition, despite evasive maneuvering by the controllers. The effectiveness was so dramatic that production was rushed. By late 1943, proximity fuses were reaching the Pacific Fleet in quantity. The first combat use occurred on January 5, 1943, when the light cruiser USS Helena shot down a Japanese Naval dive bomber near Guadalcanal using VT-fused shells. The second of 3 salvos destroyed the aircraft. The proximity fuse had claimed its first kill, but the true test would come at Okinawa, where the scale of kamikaze attacks would dwarf anything seen in the Philippines. Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa, was scheduled for April 1, 1945. The island, approximately 60 miles long and ranging from 2 to 18 miles wide, lay just 350 miles south of the Japanese home islands. Capturing it would provide airfields for the final assault on Japan. The Japanese High Command understood that losing Okinawa meant losing the war. They committed everything to its defense, including every aircraft they could scrape together for suicide attacks. Operation Tengo, the defense plan for Okinawa, envisioned waves of massed kamikaze attacks designed to sink or damage so many American ships that the invasion would fail. Intelligence estimates suggested the Japanese had 2,000 aircraft available, with more than half designated for suicide missions. The actual number was higher. The American fleet assembled for Okinawa was massive: 1,213 ships, 54,000 combat troops in the initial assault. Task Force 58 deployed 7 fleet carriers, 6 light carriers, and hundreds of supporting ships. British Task Force 57 added 4 more carriers. Between them, they could put more than 500 aircraft in the sky. Protecting this armada required every innovation the Navy had developed. 16 radar picket stations surrounded Okinawa, each manned by destroyers equipped with advanced radar and directed combat air patrol. The destroyers maintained continuous radar watch, scanning for aircraft at all altitudes. When contacts were detected, the fighter direction officer aboard the destroyer vectored cap aircraft toward the threat. The destroyers themselves represented the front line of defense. Each mounted 5 to 6 5-inch .38 guns. Each gun was now supplied almost exclusively with proximity-fuzzed ammunition. The combination of the 5-inch .38's rate of fire, the Mark 37 fire control system's accuracy, and the proximity fuse's lethality created a defensive barrier that Japanese pilots would describe with a mixture of fear and respect. The landing on April 1st went surprisingly well. The Japanese had withdrawn from the beaches, preferring to fight from prepared positions inland. By day's end, 60,000 troops were ashore with minimal casualties. The kamikaze attacks that everyone expected didn't materialize. April 2nd, 3rd, and 4th were similarly quiet. Then, April 6th arrived. At Imperial Japanese Navy airfields across Kyushu, more than 350 kamikaze aircraft and 340 escort fighters lifted off. Kikusui No. 1. Floating Chrysanthemum, the first of 10 massive coordinated kamikaze strikes. The largest aerial suicide attack in history was about to crash into the most advanced naval air defense system ever deployed. The radar pickets detected them first, more than 100 miles out, aboard destroyers at picket stations 1, 2, and 3. Radar screens filled with contacts, dozens of blips, all heading south directly toward Okinawa. General quarters sounded. Cap fighters climbed to intercept altitude. 5-inch gun crews took their positions. The fighters engaged 40 miles north of the picket line. 4 Hellcats tore into a formation of 20 kamikazes, shooting down 3 in the initial pass. But the odds were overwhelming. The kamikazes scattered, some diving for the deck, others maintaining altitude and accepting losses to get aircraft through. More fighters arrived, scrambled from carriers as soon as the raid was detected. 8 Corsairs from USS Bunker Hill, 6 Hellcats from USS Essex. They fell on the kamikazes, filling the sky with tracers and burning aircraft. But still, some got through. The radar picket destroyers opened fire with their 5-inch guns at maximum range. This was the moment the system would prove itself. The Mark 37 directors tracked incoming targets. The Mark I computers calculated firing solutions. The 5-inch guns traversed and elevated automatically to the computed angles, and then they fired. The rate of fire was unlike anything the Japanese had encountered. 1 round every 3 seconds per gun. Aboard destroyers with 5 or 6 5-inch mounts, that meant 15 to 20 shells per minute climbing toward the kamikazes. Each shell carried a proximity fuse that would detonate within lethal range of any aircraft. The sky filled with black bursts, not the familiar puffs of timed explosions, detonating at predetermined altitudes regardless of whether aircraft were present. These were proximity-fused shells, exploding precisely when aircraft came within range. The difference was visible, audible, lethal. A kamikaze diving at 400 miles per hour entered the T-2 5-inch engagement envelope at approximately 8 miles from the ship. At that range, the gun had roughly 60 seconds before impact. In 60 seconds, a single 5-inch gun could fire 20 rounds. 6 guns meant 120 proximity-fused shells directed at the incoming aircraft. The mathematics overwhelmed even the most determined pilot. Japanese pilots reported the experience with stunned disbelief. The shells seemed to know where they were. Altitude changes that should have taken them above or below the barrage made no difference. Evasive maneuvers that had worked against conventional anti-aircraft fire accomplished nothing. The shells followed them, exploded near them, tore their aircraft apart with fragments that shredded aluminum skin and punctured fuel tanks. Flight Petty Officer First Class Ryoji Uehara, one of the few kamikaze pilots who survived mission aborts and lived to be interviewed after the war, described his experience attacking American ships off Okinawa. "We called it the Wall of Steel. The shells burst everywhere, not just where we had been, but where we were going. It was as if the American gunners could see the future. Aircraft that tried to climb were hit. Aircraft that dove were hit. There was no altitude that was safe, no maneuver that worked. The only hope was speed, to dive so fast that even if they hit you, your aircraft would reach the ship through momentum alone. But speed alone couldn't overcome the density of fire. The 5-inch .38's rate of fire, combined with proximity fuses, created overlapping zones of destruction. A kamikaze attempting to penetrate to a ship had to fly through multiple engagement envelopes, each filled with shells detonating at precisely the right moment. The effectiveness statistics were stark. During Kikusui No. 1 on April 6th, of 355 kamikazes launched, American defenses destroyed 278 before they reached the fleet. The combat air patrol accounted for the majority of kills. but the 5-inch guns firing proximity-focused ammunition destroyed dozens more. Ships that would have been overwhelmed by conventional anti-aircraft fire survived because their 5-inch guns could engage multiple targets simultaneously with lethal efficiency. USS Laffey's battle on April 16th became legendary. Stationed at Picket Station 1, Laffey fought off 22 separate kamikaze attacks over 80 minutes. The destroyer's 5-inch gunners shot down 9 attackers before they could reach the ship. The proximity-focused shells created a defensive barrier that no conventional ammunition could match. 6 kamikazes struck Laffey along with 4 bombs dropped by conventional attackers. Yet she remained afloat through the skill of her crew and the protection provided by those 5-inch guns that prevented even more hits. The Japanese began to understand what they faced. Post-war interrogations of Japanese naval officers revealed that they recognized American 5-inch fire as the most dangerous threat after fighter interception. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, who coordinated many of the Kikusui raids, wrote in his diary that penetrating American destroyer screens had become nearly impossible. He noted that kamikazes achieving surprise, attacking at dawn or through cloud cover, had the highest success rates. Those intercepted by fighters and engaged by destroyers at range almost never reached their targets. The technical specifications told the story in numbers. The Inch38 fired a 55-pound projectile at a muzzle velocity of 2,600 feet per second. The shell reached 30,000 feet altitude in approximately 40 seconds. Against a target at 20,000 feet, the time of flight was roughly 25 seconds. During that 25 seconds, the Mark 37 director and Mark I computer continuously updated the firing solution, adjusting for target maneuvers detected by radar. The proximity fuse activated approximately 1,000 feet after leaving the gun barrel, giving it time to arm safely. From that point forward, it transmitted radio signals at approximately 180 MHz. When reflected signals indicated an aircraft within 70 to 100 yards, the fuse closed the detonation circuit. The entire process from detecting the reflection to triggering detonation took milliseconds. By the time a pilot saw the shell burst near his aircraft, fragments were already ripping through control surfaces and engine cowlings. The Japanese had no equivalent technology. Their anti-aircraft fire control relied on Type 94 directors that were mechanical systems without the computing power of American equipment. Japanese destroyers mounted Type 3 5-inch guns that fired 10 rounds per minute maximum, half the rate of American 5-inch 38s. Japanese heavy anti-aircraft ammunition used only mechanical time fuses, requiring manual setting and suffering from all the limitations American forces had overcome with proximity fuses. Japanese light anti-aircraft weapons were even less effective. The Type 96 25mm gun, based on a French Hotchkiss design, was the primary close-range anti-aircraft weapon in the Japanese fleet. It fired from 15-round magazines at a cyclic rate that was respectable on paper but poor in practice. The weapon suffered from excessive vibration, slow training speed, and inadequate hitting power. Japanese naval personnel interviewed after the war stated that it required an average of 1,500 rounds to shoot down an aircraft at a range of 2,000 meters, and that fire beyond that range was completely ineffective. By contrast, American analysis showed that 5-inch guns with proximity fuzzes required approximately 310 rounds per kamikaze kill during the Okinawa campaign. Given that multiple ships engaged each target simultaneously, this meant individual guns were achieving kills with dozens rather than hundreds of rounds. The effectiveness ratio compared to mechanical time fuses was approximately 4-to-1. Proximity fuzzes made every 5-inch gun 4 times more lethal against aircraft. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The human element of operating these weapons deserves equal attention to the technology. A 5-inch gun crew consisted of 15 to 27 men depending on the mount type. Each had specific responsibilities executed with drill-ground precision under combat conditions. The gun captain commanded the mount, overseeing all operations and maintaining communication with the director. The pointer and trainer operated the gun's elevation and traverse controls, though in director-controlled fire these functions were largely automatic. The hot shellman caught the ejected powder case after each shot, moving it clear to prevent jamming the breech. The powder man and projectile men formed a human chain from the ready service lockers to the loading tray. The fuse setter, in earlier operations, manually adjusted time fuses. With proximity fuses, his role shifted to visual inspection, ensuring each shell's fuse was undamaged and properly installed. The loading cycle became a choreographed routine. When the breech opened automatically after firing, the hot shell man caught the ejected powder case. Simultaneously, the projectile man placed a 55-pound shell nose down in the loading tray. The powder man positioned the powder case behind it. The rammer drove both components into the breech in a single motion. The breech closed automatically. The gun fired when the director sent the firing signal. 3 seconds. Load, ram, fire. Then again. And again. Crews trained to maintain this rhythm under conditions that would break less. Disciplined men. The noise was overwhelming. Each 5-inch gun produced a muzzle blast that could rupture eardrums at close range. 6 guns, firing nearly continuously, created a roar that made verbal communication impossible beyond basic screaming. The concussion from repeated firing caused nosebleeds, headaches, and temporary hearing loss that persisted for days after action. The physical demands were brutal. 55-pound projectiles had to be manhandled from ready lockers to loading trays continuously. Powder cases weighing 28 pounds followed each projectile. In sustained action, gun crews moved thousands of pounds of ammunition per hour. The work was performed in confined spaces, often in tropical heat, while the ship maneuvered violently and kamikazes dove from above. Men collapsed from exhaustion. Others took their places. The guns kept firing. Gunner's mate Second Class Robert Carnes, serving aboard USS Hazelwood at Radar Picket Station 14, described the experience in a letter written weeks after the battle. "We fired for 3 hours straight. My hands bled from handling shells. My ears rang so badly I couldn't hear anything but a high-pitched whine for 2 days. I watched aircraft explode in mid-air so close I could feel the heat from the fireball. I saw men on other ships die when kamikazes got through, but our guns never stopped. We fired until the barrels glowed red. We fired until ammunition handlers in the magazine were passing out from heat exhaustion. We fired because if we stopped, we died. The guns saved us. Nothing else." The ammunition expenditure was staggering. During the Okinawa campaign, American ships fired more than 600,000 rounds of 5-inch ammunition. Destroyers conducting extended actions at radar picket stations could exhaust their ready service ammunition in less than an hour of heavy combat. Ships rotated back to Karama Reto anchorage for resupply, taking on thousands of shells before returning to the picket line. The logistics of supplying this volume of ammunition tested the Navy's service force. Each 5-inch shell weighed 55 pounds. Each powder case added 28 pounds. A destroyer carrying 500 rounds of 5-inch ammunition carried over 40,000 pounds of projectiles and powder cases. Larger ships carried proportionally more. Ammunition ships, fleet oilers, and supply vessels maintained continuous resupply operations, transferring ammunition at sea while under threat of air attack. The proximity fuse production was equally impressive. By war's end, over 22 million VT fuses had been manufactured by more than 100 companies across the United States. Each fuse cost approximately $18 to produce in 1943 dollars, roughly $270 in current purchasing power. The investment was worth every penny. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal stated, "The proximity fuse has helped blaze the trail to Japan. Without the protection this ingenious device has given the surface ships of the fleet, our westward push could not have been so swift, and the cost in men and ships would have been immeasurably greater." The technological superiority extended beyond just the fuse. The entire fire control system represented American advantages in electronics, precision manufacturing, and systematic training. The Mark I computer contained hundreds of precision-machined gears, cams, and servo motors that had to operate flawlessly under battle conditions. The Mark 37 Director required optical components manufactured to tolerances that few nations could achieve. The 5-inch gun itself demanded metallurgy and production techniques that Japan's industrial base, strained by years of war and strategic bombing, could not match at scale. Japanese industry attempted to develop proximity fuses. More than 30 different designs were researched for anti-aircraft use. Some used acoustic principles, triggered by engine sound. Others employed electrostatic fields. Radio-fused designs similar to American VT fuses were explored. None entered production. The technical challenges of miniaturizing electronics, creating vacuum tubes that could survive gunfiring, and manufacturing these devices in quantity exceeded Japanese capabilities. Even if designs had been perfected, Japan's electronics industry lacked the capacity to produce millions of fuses while simultaneously supporting radar production, communication equipment, and other military electronics. The contrast in fire control philosophy was equally stark. American doctrine emphasized centralized fire control with directors and computers providing firing solutions. Japanese doctrine relied more heavily on individual gun crews using local sighting and manual training. American ships practiced coordinated defensive fire, with multiple ships in a formation concentrating fire on designated targets under centralized control. Japanese formations tended toward individual ship defense, with less coordination and no equivalent to the American Combat Information Center concept. These differences compounded. A Japanese destroyer with Type 3 5-inch guns firing 10 rounds per minute with mechanical time fuses. Engaging a target at 12,000 yards had perhaps 20 to 30 seconds of engagement time against a diving kamikaze. In 30 seconds, 5 guns might fire 25 rounds total. Without proximity fuzzes, these shells had to be precisely timed to explode near the target. Misestimating altitude by 500 feet meant the barrage exploded harmlessly. The kill probability per engagement was low. An American destroyer with 5-inch 38 guns firing 15 rounds per minute with proximity fuzzes had the same 30 seconds but could deliver 75 rounds. Each proximity fuzzed shell automatically detonated at optimum range. The kill probability per engagement was dramatically higher. Multiply this across an entire task force, with multiple destroyers, cruisers, and battleships, all firing proximity-fused ammunition under centralized fire control, and the defensive firepower became nearly impenetrable. The statistics from the Okinawa campaign demonstrated this overwhelmingly. The Japanese launched approximately 1,900 kamikaze sorties over 3 months. American fighters destroyed approximately 1,200, a 63% interception rate. Ship-based anti-aircraft fire, predominantly 5-inch guns with proximity fuses and 40mm Bofors at shorter range, accounted for another 430 kamikazes. Total destroyed, 1,630, or 86%. Only 270 kamikazes actually struck ships. Of the ships hit, fewer than half sank or were damaged beyond repair. The vast majority were repaired and returned to service. The kamikaze attacks did not prevent the capture of Okinawa. They did not force the Americans to withdraw or postpone their timetable. They inflicted significant casualties, but not enough to affect the outcome. The strategic objective failed because the tactical effectiveness of the attacks could not overcome American defenses. The 5-inch 38 was the foundation of those defenses. When Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding 5th Fleet, assessed the Okinawa campaign, he specifically noted the effectiveness of 5-inch guns with proximity fuses. His action report stated that the proximity fuse has proven to be the most important single advance in anti-aircraft gunnery. Ships equipped with proximity-fuzzed ammunition and trained gun crews consistently destroyed attacking aircraft at ranges where conventional ammunition would have been ineffective. Individual ship captains echoed this assessment. Commander Frederick Beckton, commanding USS Laffey during her famous battle, wrote that, "Our 5-inch battery saved the ship. The proximity-fused shells created a barrier that destroyed multiple kamikazes before they could reach us. Without those weapons firing those shells, Laffey would have sunk within the first 20 minutes of the attack." The Japanese recognition of American 5-inch superiority emerged in multiple sources. Surviving kamikaze pilots who aborted missions due to mechanical failures described American destroyer fire as the most feared element of attacking the fleet. The nickname 5-inch machine gun appeared in Japanese pilot debriefings. The impossibly rapid fire, the shells that seemed to seek aircraft, the impenetrable barrier of explosions, all contributed to a psychological impact that matched the physical effectiveness. Captain Rikihei Inaguchi, senior staff officer of the 1st Air Fleet and one of the architects of kamikaze tactics, wrote after the war that the effectiveness of American anti-aircraft fire far exceeded our estimates. "We expected that massed attacks would overwhelm defenses through sheer numbers. We did not anticipate that American ships could maintain such intense, accurate fire for extended periods. The rate of fire from their 5-inch guns was particularly devastating. We estimated they could fire perhaps 10 rounds per minute. In combat, they fired 20 or more. Combined with their new fuses that seemed to detonate at precisely the right moment, the defensive fire was far more lethal than our planning assumed." This Japanese perspective revealed not just technological surprise, but a fundamental miscalculation about American capabilities. Japanese planners had based kamikaze tactics on assumptions formed earlier in the war, when American anti-aircraft effectiveness was lower. They had not accounted for the systematic improvements in weapons, ammunition, fire control, and training that American forces implemented between 1942 and 1945. They certainly had not anticipated the proximity fuse, which remained one of the most closely respected, guarded secrets of the war. The security surrounding VT fuses was extraordinary. Shells were never fired over land where duds might be recovered. Strict accounting procedures tracked every round. Ships were instructed to fire all proximity-fused ammunition before being sunk or captured to prevent the technology from falling into enemy hands. The precautions worked. The Japanese never captured an intact proximity fuse. German intelligence obtained some information through other sources, but never developed a working equivalent. The Allies maintained their technological advantage through the war's end. The development of the Inch38 and its associated fire control systems represented something broader than just weapons technology. It demonstrated American advantages in systematic innovation, industrial production, and organizational learning. The gun itself emerged from careful analysis of operational requirements and engineering trade-offs. The fire control system reflected investment in analog computing and precision manufacturing. The proximity fuse resulted from mobilizing civilian scientific expertise for military applications. The training doctrine evolved through systematic study of combat results and rapid dissemination of lessons learned. Japanese forces possessed individual technological achievements, excellent optical instruments, the superb Type 93 torpedo, advanced carrier aircraft design in the early war years. But they lacked the systematic approach to innovation that characterized American weapons development. Japanese military research remained fragmented between Army and Navy, with limited cooperation. Industrial capacity constraints meant that even good designs often couldn't be produced in sufficient quantities. The emphasis on offensive operations in Japanese doctrine meant that defensive systems like anti-aircraft weapons received lower priority in resource allocation. These systemic differences manifested most clearly in anti-aircraft defense. When the war began, Japanese and American anti-aircraft capabilities were roughly comparable, both inadequate against modern aircraft. By 1945, American forces had transformed their defenses through technology and training, while Japanese capabilities had stagnated or declined. The result was the one-sided slaughter of the Okinawa campaign, where Japanese pilots flew willingly to their deaths, but accomplished far less than their sacrifice deserved because they faced weapons and tactics they could not overcome. The Inch38 remained in American service for decades after World War II. Destroyers, cruisers, and battleships built during the war continued operating with 5-inch.38 guns through the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and into the Cold War era. The USS Long Beach, a nuclear-powered guided missile cruiser, was the last active ship to carry 5-inch.38 guns when she was decommissioned in 1994, 50 years after the weapon first saw combat. The gun's longevity testified to the fundamental soundness of its design. The rate of fire remained competitive even as weapons technology advanced. The dual-purpose capability retained value in an era of jet aircraft and guided missiles. The reliability and maintainability meant that crews could keep the weapons operational with reasonable maintenance. Most importantly, the extensive production during World War II created an enormous inventory of guns, ammunition, and spare parts that made replacing the system economically unattractive for decades. Modern weapons have surpassed the 5-inch.38 in raw capability. Computer fire control replaced analog systems. Guided missiles provide far longer range and higher kill probability than any gun. But the principles established by the 5-inch.38, rapid fire, dual-purpose design, integration with advanced fire control, proximity-fused ammunition, remain foundational to naval air defense. Today's close-in weapon systems, whether guns or missiles, are direct descendants of the defensive doctrine developed around the 5-inch.38 at Okinawa. The human cost of the Kamikaze campaign remained staggering despite American defensive success. 36 ships sunk, 368 damaged, 4,907 sailors killed, 4,874 wounded. The Navy's losses at Okinawa exceeded casualties at Pearl Harbor. Every ship hit represented death and destruction. Every kamikaze that penetrated the defenses took American lives. The 5-inch.38 and proximity fuses prevented far greater losses, but they could not prevent all losses. No defensive system could achieve perfect protection against an enemy willing to die to deliver his weapon. For the sailors who manned the 5-inch guns, the experience left permanent marks. The physical toll, hearing loss, exhaustion, injuries from handling heavy ammunition in combat conditions. The psychological impact of watching aircraft dive toward your ship, of seeing kamikazes explode close enough to feel the heat, of knowing that survival depended on you and your crew, maintaining fire rate no matter what. Many veterans described the sensation of unreality during combat, the way time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, how individual moments became frozen in memory while hours blurred together. Seaman First Class Donald Mitchell, who manned a 5-inch mount aboard USS Cassin Young during her 2 kamikaze engagements, wrote decades later, "People ask if I was scared. I was terrified. But there was no time to think about fear. Load the shell, ram it home, the gun fires, eject the case. Load again. You do it because the man next to you is doing it. You do it because if you stop, everyone dies. You do it because training takes over when conscious thought fails. After it was over, after the kamikazes were gone, or destroyed or had hit us, then you had time to be scared. Then you realized what had happened. Then you shook so badly you couldn't light a cigarette. But during the action, you were just part of the machine. You and the gun and the crew, all one thing, trying to stay alive." This human dimension, the courage and discipline of crews who maintained fire under conditions that tested the limits of endurance, deserves equal recognition with the technology they employed. The 5-inch.38 was an excellent weapon, but weapons require skilled operators to achieve their potential. The American sailors who manned these guns at Okinawa, who fired thousands of rounds while kamikazes dove toward them, who maintained discipline and training under the worst imaginable stress, they transformed technology into victory. The Japanese pilots who flew against them deserve acknowledgement as well. They faced a defensive system they could not overcome, armed with technology their nation could not match, fighting for a cause already lost. Many were barely trained, teenagers with 50 hours of flight time told to dive their aircraft into ships. Others were experienced pilots who volunteered for suicide missions out of desperation or duty, or belief in orders they could not refuse. They showed courage, even as they committed to tactics that accomplished little strategically. The comparison between American technology and Japanese fanaticism became a narrative theme in post-war analysis. Free men with superior weapons defeating totalitarian zealots. Democracy's productive capacity overwhelming authoritarianism's spiritual desperation. These narratives contain truth but oversimplify complex realities. Japanese pilots who flew kamikaze missions were not zombies or robots. Many were coerced by military culture that made refusal unthinkable. Others volunteered, believing they were protecting their homeland from invasion. They were human beings, capable of fear and hope and doubt, caught in a war their nation was losing and ordered to die in a futile attempt to change the outcome. What the Inch38 demonstrated was not the superiority of one culture over another, but the advantages of systematic innovation, industrial capacity, and learning organizations. American forces in 1941 were unprepared for war, particularly for air attacks on naval forces. Over 4 years, they identified deficiencies, developed solutions, tested them in combat, refined them based on results, produced them at scale, and deployed them throughout the fleet. This process created weapons like the Inch38, with proximity fuses and fire control systems that could kill attacking aircraft with reliability that Japanese forces could not match. The lesson extended beyond World War II. Military effectiveness requires not just brave soldiers or advanced weapons, but systems that can identify problems, generate solutions, test them, refine them, and deploy them before the enemy does the same. Organizations that can iterate faster, learn more efficiently, and adapt more rapidly possess decisive advantages over opponents who cannot. The Inch38 represented American iteration at its finest. From the initial dual-purpose requirement through the development of semi-fixed ammunition, power ramming, and automatic breaches, from the integration with Mark 37 directors and Mark I computers to the revolutionary addition of proximity fuses, each step built on previous experience. Each improvement addressed limitations identified in combat. Each innovation was produced at scale and distributed throughout the fleet. By April 1945, the weapon system had evolved into something that could fire 20 shells per minute with accuracy and lethality that enemy pilots called impossible. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.